chapter 5. We're not in 6. Steve, our lesson sermon this morning was in chapter 6. And Steve, I'm going to have you step up here in just a second. So, just to recap where we are in the study, Jesus is delivering the Sermon on the Mount, and he is presenting his lesson, his thoughts to the poor, the sick, the hurting, those that were subject to heavy taxes, middle to lower social income, and those that were kind of the overlooked part of the society. They were outside the religious elite group, and he's delivering this message. He's up on the mountain there, talking to the folks, probably sitting down, giving a message to his disciples first. It was a message to the disciples, and then the people, the crowd, were hearing it as well. So they were listening to that. We just finished the Beatitudes. We went through a lot of those and how that the words, the message he was communicating in the Beatitudes were completely different than what we value and we hold up in society as well. And then we're getting ready to turn into Matthew 5:17 is where we're starting today. And when I asked Steve to kind of talk to us about the Old Testament, there's so much Old Testament reference and thought and going into this that I thought it'd be good for him to kind of to address that question. How do we handle the Old Testament? What does it mean to us? I'm going to let you go ahead.
How long did we go?
As long as you want.
I did a handout last week. Are y'all here to get a handout? Because I've still got it. First, let me tell you, if the bell rings with someone, I would welcome anyone to tell me. Please do not hesitate.
I will not. Let somebody else do it.
Please do not hesitate. All right, let's read Matthew 5:17 just a minute. There are 2 or 3 verses. This is Jesus' words. He says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." What's this idea of fulfilling the law? "For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these commandments and so teaches others shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." So last week, what I tried to introduce was my own study and my own quandary over a number of years with how we should handle the Old Testament when we read Old Testament. What value is the Old Testament to the New Testament church? Okay? And I told you that had been a real problem for me personally, because just in my past, in my growing up in Church of Christ, I feel like it has been impressed upon me sometimes the valuelessness of the Old Testament. I think that's been impressed on me. And I would also recall a time in my life when I only carried a New Testament. Y'all recall those days? Yeah. I mean, that's what we had. We had New Testaments. We didn't even have an Old Testament. And so, just again to recount some of the things that happened to me to maybe start making me think a little harder about this. I took a course from a professor at Harding, Richard Oster, Dr. Oster. The course was on Romans and Galatians, but we did as much study there on Deuteronomy as we did on Romans. And I read and studied Deuteronomy really hard, and I loved Deuteronomy. I didn't before, but came to understand that Deuteronomy is sometimes referred to as the fifth gospel. It's the fifth gospel. Because when you read through Deuteronomy, in fact, what you get is this picture of grace that if you hadn't looked for it, and if you'd been taught like I did, grace was something new when Jesus came, okay, then you totally lose out. I totally lost out, okay? But when I started recognizing that the Exodus was before Sinai. Hear that? That was something Oster would say. Exodus was before Sinai. Before the law was ever given, grace had been given. That really impressed me. And the whole book is very much, this is what the Lord has done. Okay. So that the law was given to show people how to act, how to function within the grace that had been given to them. But it was always grace in the very beginning. But that impressed me, still impresses me when I read it that way. And you can so easily read the Old Testament, it's just a book of law, and just forget that there's even any grace there. And then, things come along in your life, and I've told you all this, and most of you all know this already. You can learn so much. You learn so much from your own children when you listen to them. They teach us so very, very much. And that's been the case with Margaret and I. Our children have taught us a lot. And I would say that for the purposes of today's subject, Nathan and Nathan's terminal degree being in Old Testament studies, Exodus, that kind of grabs your attention. In fact, when people start criticizing the Old Testament or demeaning the Old Testament, I kind of take it personally now. Because I'm thinking, what did my son spend all that time on a worthless subject for? Okay, why would he do such a thing? Well, it's not. So it's really impressed me. And then I read this with what Jesus has to say. And, one of my first questions is, well, what about the Ten Commandments? What about the Ten Commandments? And especially that one about the Sabbath. I don't know, is there a Sabbath anymore? How do you handle the Sabbath? If we think we still have the Ten Commandments, how do you handle the Sabbath? I mean, we don't practice Sabbath, or do we?
Go to the Seventh-day Church.
Or should we? There are ways that some people practice it different than the way I practice it. I still believe that there's a very, very strong understanding there of the importance of rest, the importance of taking time, getting away from our world of production, and sitting there and realize in restfulness that God's given it all to us. I still think that there's time for us to take a Sabbath in that sense, and there's times when we need to take Sabbaths in the sense that we do rest. We do find a place to be quiet, we do rest. Something I've struggled with. So, I put together the outline. We talked about a little of it last week. I particularly tried to point out the business in Deuteronomy of circumcision of the heart. The idea that there was a law that was going to be given that involved a circumcision of the heart. I pointed out Psalms 19, Psalms 119, two great psalms that are both virtually entirely given to the beauty of the law and the rightfulness of the law. There's any number of verses from those chapters that we sing, and the one I highlighted was, Thy law is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my, got it? And then recognized that somewhere along the line, we find Jesus condemning in the New Testament, which sounds like he's condemning the law. Sounds that way. But in actuality, what he's condemning is the legalization of the law. Now, what do you think I mean by legalization of the law? What would you think I mean by that? How would you legalize the law? Well, what if laws had underlying intentionality about them? What if underlying the law was understanding? What if the law was more than something black and white that you just took and you did without thought, without intention? What if a group of Pharisees took that law with no intention and simply followed the black and white with no understanding whatsoever of what the law represented in terms of how to act, in terms of what your response to grace might be, in terms of how you might love someone else, in terms of how you might treat other people and not objectify them? What if that was the meaning of the law, as opposed to just, again, the black and white? And clearly that had been done. And it was being done in the Old Testament times. And the prophets pointed that out. And I mentioned last week 3 passages that it's amazing when you start reading the so-called minor prophets. The minor prophets, it's just so obvious and multiple. And whether it be Amos, I mentioned Hosea 6:6, which is one of my favorites. I also mentioned Micah, and I can't remember whether it's Micah, the end of Micah 5, or Micah 6:12, or where it is. It's in the same range. They say almost the same thing. They basically say, God wants mercy, not sacrifice. Now, how might it be that people of God could be offering sacrifice but not offering mercy? How might they do that? How about if they have legalized the law, they're just walking through the steps to do what God asked them to do, again, with no intentionality, no purpose behind it, no understanding of this is why we do what we do? Well, Jesus, this Matthew 5:17, he certainly is supportive of the law. And we have other occasions that I marked down, the Matthew 10, the Luke 10, whether you're talking to a rich young ruler or whether you're talking to, I think the other was a Pharisee, where people come to Jesus and basically say, Jesus, we want to follow you. And Jesus is able to look right into their hearts and say, well, I tell you what, you want to follow me, sell what you have and give it to the poor. And that's kind of a end of conversation for some, because they are interested in satisfying the law in a legal way and not interested at all in what is behind the law, which is doing to others. So when we get to Matthew, and particularly the Sermon on the Mount, there are 4 or 5 things that I've listed here that are all from Dallas Willard. And Margaret wanted me to say what book this was from, and it's called Divine Conspiracy. If you've read, has anyone here read Divine Conspiracy? Divine Conspiracy, it's a little bit of a hard read because it's wordy and the chapters are 2 hours long. But it's a great book. It is a great book. I recommend it. But there are different situations that he had. For example, and I've written, this is not verbatim, but this is close to what Dr. Willard has. but like anger, when you deal with a situation of anger, or you're contemptuous of an individual, the old law basically said don't kill the guy. That's what the old law said, don't kill him. Well, Jesus recognized there's a whole lot of bad stuff that happens between not liking somebody and killing them. Okay. So Jesus, love your neighbor, love your enemy, and your mind can betray you. In fact, if you dwell on not liking someone, if you dwell on all the problems that they are, etc., etc., if you dwell on that, if you let your mind sit there, well, first of all, your mind doesn't sit there, and after a while, action takes over. Sexual attraction. This is a really interesting one, in my mind. The old law basically says don't have sex with somebody besides your wife. It's basically what the law says, okay? But Jesus really, boy, he comes on a little strong right here. His comment is don't lust. Don't lust. If you look at another woman, I'm speaking from a man's point of view. I've never known the woman's point of view. But the man's point of view, you look at a woman, and all you can do is objectify the woman and point out some physical attributes and some thoughts that you would like to entertain, okay? Boy, you've just gone too far. Jesus would say, that is, you're basically practicing a sexual sin or adultery in your heart. That's what you're doing. A hard subject right there, because there's this line where Jesus doesn't say, look at somebody and not recognize they're attractive. You can do that. You can do that. It's nice to see what God has made, okay? On the other hand, your mind can take you places it doesn't need to go. That's where sinfulness enters in. If you're in an unhappy marriage, the Old Testament, Jesus says Moses allowed, you can give her a pink slip. Lots of reasons for that, okay? She doesn't need a pink slip because without that, she is truly destitute. She's got no way whatsoever to make a living in that day and time. She's going to die in poverty, okay? Or be forced into another relationship, maybe selling herself, and you in effect cause that. If it has to do with testifying or giving vows, Jesus would say, you know, it's real easy. It's real easy to emphasize you're telling the truth by swearing. And, you know, we take that to mean, I was taught that meant in court, they ask you, I saw me swear to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. Okay, all right. I was told that was basically the whole meaning of it. I believe it's much broader than that. I don't know whether you all have seen it or not, but there are a number of people that I know, when they really want to impress upon me that they're telling the truth, they do go to swearing. Swearing in a vernacular sense involves a lot of four-letter words. Okay? Jesus says, look, just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Tell the truth all the time. Be serious about every word that you use, okay? You don't have to swear that you're telling the truth. Just tell the truth all the time. Personal injury for someone, an eye for an eye. And you know, these old law, these I would tell you, what I'm giving you is not what the old law taught, it's the interpretation of the law. And Jesus makes it clear that there's more to it than that. Instead of an eye for an eye, instead of trying to love the person, try to forgive the person. And then the hardest one on here, at least the hardest one for me to understand, is how you love and bless your enemy. Anybody else have a hard time with that one? All right. I've got a comment about what the greatest command is, which I think supports all this. This other quote of Jesus, you have to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees And then I moved down to the context of Paul, because I think Paul has a lot to say about this also. And it's in more of an abstract way, because Paul in Romans particularly, he talks about the law of sin and death, the law of sin and death. And he contrasts that with the law of the Spirit of life. Okay? For me, these are particularly hard. They're particularly hard because when I read what Paul has to say without an awful lot of thought, I cannot but arrive at a conclusion that Paul is very negative about the effects of the law. Okay? And as such, my next, where that goes is that if Paul's negative about the effects of the law, then in fact, is not Paul also negative about the law? Right? You hear that? But I would say that there's a difference, there's a big difference between Paul being negative about the effects of the law and concluding from that Paul is negative about the law. In fact, Paul has very positive things to say about the law. And Paul would teach about the law in terms of being a schoolmaster, in terms of it identifying sin, in terms of it having the positive effect of directing us to Jesus, who is the source of grace, wherein we can find forgiveness of our sin. A quote by Dallas Willard, which I thought was worth considering. Law is not the source of righteousness, but the course of righteousness. Hear that? Law is not the course of not the source of righteousness, but the course of righteousness. There's a huge difference between knowing how to be righteous and being imputed or counted as righteous through the grace of God. Okay, that's just a tremendous difference. And then I wrote this one passage, the Colossians 2:14 passage. And you know what I'm talking about, we could talk about this for weeks, I suppose. I don't want to do that, I'm not prepared to do that. But Colossians 2:14, basically the quote is that the old law was nailed to the cross. Okay? And I would tell you, I think that passage was probably misquoted, mistreated as much as any passage I knew of growing up. Because this business of the old law being nailed to the cross, in fact, was the Old Testament that was nailed to the cross, therefore no reason whatsoever for it. And I don't view the old law that is referred to there in terms of the Old Testament. Rather, I view it as a number of the misgivings, interpretations, etc., of the law that had been, quote, nailed to the cross. And then, as a space filler, I wrote a question. Do we here ever legalize the new law? Which is to say, and it was mentioned this morning, I love this. We listened to a pod that our son-in-law did with, who's the guy? The Magic Eels guy? Who wrote?
No, I don't think his name just, was it Richard Beck?
Yeah,
Yes.
Richard Beck. Richard Beck. So Greg McKenzie had Richard Beck on, and they did a podcast. And, the part that I could understand, because those guys they got to be careful that they're not at a level where none of us know what the world they're talking about. And we were listening to that. Hey, we were listening to that on the way back from the ball game. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't just Gerald was part of it. We listened to it on the way back from the Tennessee game, which incidentally was a win as opposed to this Saturday. We listened to it, and they talked a whole lot about. They used this word. One of Greg's favorite words is intentionality. Okay, and very interesting. The word was used twice this morning. Jerry used it initially in his comments, and then Lord's Supper person. Ryland used it again in his comments. I thought that was pretty interesting because I do think it's really, really important. It's so very important that we here be intentional about what we do. And that the process of us being a church, if we are to be a good group of leaders here, if we're to be a good group of elders, ministers to one another, if we're to do that, then we have to be intentional about who we are and why we're doing it. The fact of the matter is, there remain a lot of us who are here on Sunday mornings because for some reason, besides being intentional, in the sense we come here, as Ryland says, and take the supper in order to be changed, in order to grow, right? We come here because we want to mark off a box. I do that. I do that. There are plenty of mornings. There are plenty of mornings where, you know, I get up and I go to work, not because I want to go to work, but because I just know I got to go to work. Okay? And I'll tell you, we have to be so very careful here and within our religious lives that we don't get up on Sunday morning and come to church because we got to go to church. We just got to be careful about it. And I'm not telling you that, you know, if you ever have a thought like that, it's a go to hell moment for you. I'm not telling you that because I'm telling you we all have those moments, okay? But we need to continue to think about what it is that we're doing here, why we're here, and what we're trying to get done. And what we're trying to get done is, in fact, be a stronger part, be able to have a greater effort, more support in the mission of God. Isn't that what we're about? Isn't that what we need to be about? That's why we're here. So, anyway, that's about what I got to say about that. Anybody want to ask anything, make any comments at all?
I heard a very good news clip this week. A man was drugged into court. He was fined about his neighborhood or whatever. He was shoveling his elderly neighbor's driveway, and he was fined and put into court. So the man goes to court, and this judge, he listened, and he finally ruled. He's gavelled down, and he says, no, I will not legalize and I will not prevent this man from being a good neighbor to his elderly neighbor and being kind to her. He says, dismissed. And so he dropped all that. And then he made a little spiel, the judge did, about we have got to be considerate and kind and compassionate to our neighbors. And I'm not going to prevent this man from doing that.
Yeah, it's a great story.
So good judge.
Great story. Anybody else? Okay, Gerald, I took longer than 5 minutes.
That's all right.
Appreciate you leaving me longer than 3 minutes today.
I put you up first, you left me with 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, I appreciate that, no kidding. Steve's thoughts on the Old Testament. And I got a question, kind of in light of that. And it's this idea of, I'll write it up here, and I may misspell it. Has he got 2 L's? Is it full F-U-L-L? All right. Is there a difference between those two thoughts? He says he fulfilled the old law. Jesus did. That's in that verse, right? Is that what he said? He says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets, but I have come to fulfill them. Fulfill them. This is what's in our Bibles, right? What does that mean? What does it mean to fulfill? Is it about prophecy? Is that what it's talking about? They prophesied, he fulfilled what it said that he would come. He was, his birth was prophesied, the way he was born, where he would go. We've been talking a lot about that during that early part of Matthew. But there's a little bit more to it, right, than that. And that's what Steve was talking about. And I think when we read this chapter, it's really about feeling full. What do you think I mean by that?
I've always thought he filled it full of meaning.
Yeah.
By explaining it, living it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when Steve was talking about how the Pharisees and the Israelite leaders, the leaders of that group, you know, they had interpreted it, and they had put a whole bunch of stuff along with it to make it mean something to them. How they were going to keep that. Steve mentioned the Sabbath. I think all it really says is that don't make fire and don't do any work. That's what the Torah says. So that leaves a lot to be desired, right? I mean, as far as you're going to try to do that, keep that commandment, how are you going to do that? You don't make fire, that's easy. But don't do any work. What's work? People have to interpret that. They created this law, these laws, these other things that this is what work means. And instead of going by what the intent of it was, they had created a whole new set of laws. But Jesus, in this chapter, is really taking the Old Testament, the old laws, and he's trying to show us what the intent, what God really wanted us to do with the law that he'd given us. You think it was important for him to come up here and first thing say, I didn't come to abolish it? I mean, he's talking to a bunch of Jewish people, right? And they believe in the law. They'd lived their whole life. The Torah, they wanted to know how to live a good, righteous life. Where did they go figure out how to do that? They would go to the Torah. They'd see what it said. What do you have to do? What does God really want me to do? So when he comes in, the first thing he says is, I didn't come to abolish it. I'm really coming here to tell you what it really means and what God really wanted you to understand about this law. I think that's really important. It's something that I had not, and like Steve says, in my history, I don't think I really truly understood that we need to understand the law, the Torah. It's still important to us today. I mean, what God gave, that's his words that he gave us and them on how he really wanted things to be done. Now, he wants us to satisfy, like Jesus, the intent of those words. And Jesus is teaching us that in this chapter and then in his words, okay? Does that ring with you guys some? It did with me. The other thing that I hesitate to do this because I don't know anything about this stuff, but I saw a guy talking about, this dot and tittle and all that stuff that he satisfied every little bit. It has something to do with the language, the way it's written. That means something different than that. So, and that's supposed to connect. This is what he's talking about, or this word that had a line with a connection on it was something different than that. And so when he's talking about jot and tittle, he's talking about the very minute things in their language that he was going to satisfy. The very little, every aspect of it, Jesus was satisfying in his life and what he said and what he was doing. Not a stroke of the pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. He's going to make sure it all happens. He's respecting of it. Jesus knew the Torah, right? He had spent a lifetime of devotion on it, reading it, meditating on it, being taught it. And so he was satisfying that. Now, let's read on here. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. All right. If you're sitting in the crowd and you hear these words from Jesus, what might your reaction be to hearing that? You spent your whole life being on the outside. You've watched Pharisees and teachers of the law, and you've watched them deliver messages, treat people a certain way, whatever. Maybe you felt outcast, and he says, your faith has to be stronger than those. What might you think?
Panic.
You panic? No way I can do that, right?
How, yeah.
What'd you say?
Ask how.
How? How can I do that? Yeah. That'd be one reaction. Would there be another one? Janet, I see you back there, you got something to say.
Well, I was just thinking that the word there is righteousness. Their righteousness has to be greater, and righteousness is right with God.
Mhm.
So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the scribes, they're the ones that the people look to interpret the law, to help them understand what the law meant and how they were supposed to live their lives.
Yeah,
And so, to me, this crowd sitting here feels like, well, wait, they've got all the answers. I don't have all the answers.
Mhm.
There's no way I can do this because I don't have all the information that I need to do that.
yeah, right.
So it's a hopeless situation.
Yeah, might feel hopeless, yeah. Yeah, you just got through going through the Beatitudes and talking to them about blessed are those that are in these terrible situations, sad, and then he says this, your righteousness has got to be better than these religious leaders. So I think we're hitting on one reaction maybe, but I think there might be another one too.
Can't do that.
What's that? Can't do it?
That's right.
No way I can live like that.
Not as good as they are.
Yeah.
There might be some that look at it as some hope. But to me, I would think they would sit there and think, how in the world can we be more righteous than the Pharisees and Sadducees?
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
he is offering hope here. I mean,
I think there might be a subset of people there that would say, I've watched how they treat people and how they've carried out the law of God, and I think I'm gonna do better. I think he's given me a way to see what true righteousness is. And so, that's the way Jesus does with his words, is that it hits some people one way and it hits others a completely different way. I think there's some people in the crowd that might just say, I'm following this guy because he's got a path forward for us that's going to help us. I think they might have been given hope. That these guys that have been looking down on me my whole life, they may be wrong. And they're not, I know the Torah, I've heard it, and I think there's a better way.
But those verses that come after that, that's where he explains what he means by, here's how your righteousness is greater than the Pharisees.
That's right. We're going to get to that. So I think this is, I'm just asking you, if you're in the crowd and you hear this, you might react several different ways. Did Jesus reject the Torah? Was he against Judaism? Are y'all sure? I'm looking for y'all to be confident in your answer. I think we've kind of taught that maybe he was against it.
What is Judaism?
yeah.
Like the Jewish religion, the religion that God gave to yes,
If he had been against it, he would not have kept it.
he would not have kept it.
And he
Yeah.
did keep it. He kept it perfectly.
Yep. So who was he against? Who was he really targeting? Who was he after? Who was he really most upset with?
The leaders.
The devil, as Steve said. You said, I think your answer is more correct.
Those are not pure, those that were not pure in heart.
Yeah, the people that were supposed to be the leaders of the church, the faith, the God-given commands, he was upset at because they had taken something really good that he gave them that was his will, and they had made it something completely different. It was about separating. It was about taking people and casting them away. You're not part of this. And that's not what he intended. The intention, so what was the intention of the Old Testament? Was it to create a set of people that only had it and others didn't? Was that what his intention? What was the intention of the Old Testament? Intent.
Of the Israelite people, the Israelites, you talking about like of the Israelites?
Mhm.
In the Old Testament, they were to be his light to the world, just like we are.
and they had failed that, right? So they weren't satisfying his intention, that's much.
Well, he told the leaders at one point, you put so many rules and stipulations to this law that there's no way the people can,
Yeah,
can do this.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and you have to say, God wouldn't give something that wasn't good.
Right,
So you
Right.
can't question that the law is not good
it was good.
if it was interpreted in the right way.
All right,
But the law is supposed to be a path to inclusiveness, not exclusivity.
That's what I was trying to get at.
And it got interpreted
Mhm.
as exclusivity.
yeah, yeah. So let me ask a different question, because I think it also talks about here the least commands, least of these commands. Are there some commands more important than others?
Well, I think the first one is definitely the greatest command, reflects
Love
a
God.
couple of those there
Mhm.
that are above all the others.
Yeah,
Because you would think everything else would fall into place if that's the way you work.
you think Jesus thought there were some commands more important than others? Somebody say something?
I said, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, he's got it greatest, and the next under that, then that shows
yeah,
distinction between.
yeah. So how do you know what the greatest and the least are?
Jesus told us. He told us what the
You told us what the two greatest ones were, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he did tell us that. So is the rest of them not important?
Least does not mean not.
Say it wasn't important, yeah.
Yeah, least does not mean not. It doesn't mean that there's parts of the law that are not important. It means that loving God is where it all begins.
Mm.
And if you don't do that, you can't do any of the rest.
Right, right. So, yeah, I think least and greatest commands are something we have to think about. What's really important? What's the intent behind these? All right, so let's y'all got something else. Let's move on to this framework of interpreting the rest of it. Matthew 5:21 through 47. There's no way we're going to get through all of that, but what I really want to do is kind of challenge us to do what Janet was just saying earlier, which was, okay, so he said, he's kind of laid the groundwork that the scribes and Pharisees don't have it right, and I want you guys to get it. I want you guys to get it. And here's some case studies. He doesn't go through everything, every law, but he does go through some of them. And let's think about these. Let's try to lay a framework for how we think about these. So Matthew 5:21 through, let's just read about murder, 26. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, is it Raka? Is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. All right. So he quotes, where did he get do not murder? Ten Commandments. He took the sacred 10 Commandment, do not murder. All right. And he then starts trying to break that down. So the question he's answering is, who's got this murder thing down pat? The scribes and Pharisees. They've laid out what murder is, right? You think that's true? Yeah. They believe that wholeheartedly. And then he starts, so then what he's trying to do is say, what is the intention behind that command? What is the intention? What is the scribes and Pharisees? They have it like this, but what does God want by that command? What is God's really trying to get at by giving that command? So the first thing he says is, if you're angry with your brother, you'll be subject to judgment. So I'm gonna try to lay out something here. So if you're angry, where do you go? Where do you go? You get judgment, right? You get judgment. And that's probably, I guess, okay, let's just put murder up here first. Okay? All of it's murder. So if you're angry, you get judgment. What's the next one? If you say raka, what does that mean? What does raka mean? Oh. What does raka mean?
Good for nothing.
It's like calling somebody a moron or an idiot or,
Empty head.
empty-headed. What do you get if you call somebody that? You go to the Sanhedrin, right? I'm just going to put an S. Sanhedrin. You go to the Sanhedrin. And then if you say, you fool, what do you get? Whew. So, wouldn't you have thought he would have started, if you murder somebody, you're going to go to hell? Wouldn't you have thought that would have been that way? So you start out with the worst thing you could possibly do, and then you go down to being angry, you get judgment from probably the local officials, which being angry enough to kill somebody, probably. And then you just call somebody an idiot, you get judged by the Supreme Court of the Israel community. And then if you call somebody a fool, you're going to go to hell. Isn't that upside down? Wouldn't you have thought that would have been what you would get? Why would he give it that way? What is he trying to communicate by saying, in our mind, these are the lesser sins, probably down here calling somebody a name. You get this worse punishment. What do you think he's trying to get at?
That the Pharisees have no idea what his intentions are. They just need to quit playing.
Well, they've definitely got it wrong, right? Yeah? What's he trying to emphasize by this? Is he just fooling with us? Yes.
I think he's trying to prevent you from getting to murder. In other words, settle your differences immediately. Don't let them fester and boil over eventually as murder.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's emphasizing this lesser thing to prevent you from getting here.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's in your heart.
Yeah. What'd you say?
That's what's in your heart, at least.
So I think, and this is the way we need to read all these, okay? You need to read all the case studies that Jesus goes through and say, what is his intention? What's he trying to tell us? And he's wanting us to change what's on the inside of us first. We can not murder and still have anger, calling people names, being contempt for people, not loving people. And if that's where you're at, it doesn't really matter if you murdered somebody. He wants to change the inside out first. The inside first, and it'll change what's on the outside. I think that's what he's trying to tell us with this. It's not that he thinks, I don't think he's scaling this and saying this is worse than murder. I think what he's trying to emphasize is just how important it is how we treat people, how we treat each other, and how we handle conflict, and how we handle all these other things in our life. All right? Yes.
I was thinking about what Steve said earlier, it won't, your heart, it just won't sit there. And you're right, the Pharisees sensing
Yeah, that is a great example. Did Jesus ever use that word?
In the parable of the rich man, he said that,
You
he
fool.
said to him, "Thy fool is not my soul, we require of thee." And, then what?
Y'all look up, yeah, that's one place, Matthew 23.
Then he called us Pharisees.
That's what I was getting ready to say,
I don't know where it is, but.
Matthew 23, 16 and 17.
You know, I was looking at that earlier, Matthew 23, Jesus said, the Pharisees and Sadducees sit in Moses' seat.
Uh-huh.
He says, so therefore do what they say,
Yeah,
not as they did.
not as they did.
So,
23 what?
16 and 17, I think, is where I,
Fool.
well, yeah. Blind guys, I think that, oh yeah, 17 says, you blind fool. So, he said, don't do this in this verse, but yet, Jesus turned right around and a little bit later, he uses the word talking to somebody. Y'all make sense of that, wouldn't you?
I think something mulling around in my head here is fool. It seems to me like if I devalue someone enough to think they're a fool, I'm not gonna be concerned about their salvation or their
Right.
walk with God or not.
Mhm.
It would be as if I had murdered them.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's some connection there more
Yeah.
so than.
It is about valuing people.
Right.
You're exactly right. That is exactly right. How do we see each other? Do we value? Are we calling people each other names because we have a disagreement or whatever? But I'm a little puzzled by how Jesus uses that word, and he's God. I guess he can do whatever he wants to, right? Yeah, I think he had looked at those folks and was trying to shake them up to get them to change the way they were handling his word. Anyway, this is what's hard about these, is because these are, the intention of somebody. You judge me by my intentions. That's really difficult. What does God want? And I don't think we are to avoid the complexity of what God has given to us. I mean, it's simple, but it's at the same time, it's complex too, because living that out is not, you have to think about it. What does God want? He's not giving us a checklist of things that will tell us exactly how to do everything in life. So we have to figure out, love God, love each other. What did he do? How did he handle himself? Those are things that we ask ourselves every time we come up on something like this. And when you hear his word, he's wanting us to look at and ask the question, what does God intend us to do in these situations?
Matthew 5 is about hate.
About what?
About hate. It's about, me just, just really demean you.
Mhm.
Matthew 23, Jesus he doesn't hate these folks. He hates how they're so messed up and valuing
Right.
gold instead of the temple or what the first was.
Yeah.
And I think his intent is really to confront them, and ultimately to change them or
Yeah.
to correct or to save them.
Yeah.
So you've got a whole different motive in 5 versus 23.
Yeah. So,
It's all right for you to tell me, Randy, you're being foolish.
Yeah.
When I'm doing something or saying something that has such consequence versus saying, Randy, you're being a fool.
Yeah.
Well, he calls them a whole bunch of other names in
he does.
So it's not the only thing he calls them.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that word meek, we talked about that last week, and Jesus was Jesus meek, and you got to really think about what all he did and say, well, that's meekness. I must not be thinking about
I'm
it.
a pretty meek person then.
I'm pretty meek compared to that. Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to go we're gonna take next week, we've got a special activity. We'll probably start either in 6 or 7, but your assignment is to take every one of these case studies that he talks about, that you've heard this, I'm telling you this, is to think about, okay, this is what the scribes and Pharisees believed about this, and this is how they lived it. What is God's intention for us in these commandments, okay? All right, see y'all.